Hi, everyone. Alongside Chris Aceto, I'm Siddique Farooqi. Glad you can join us for our coverage of Arnold Classic weekend. And Chris, let's start with the obvious. You look around, it is not March, it is October. It is unseasonably warm here, and it is eerily quiet. It is another Arnold Classic, no expo, no Arnold Sports Festival. A very quiet but very bodybuilding focused event.
It's remarkably quiet. I've been here for 3 days, and it's just like a ghost town. And we're used to seeing thousands and thousands of people. Nonetheless, you know what? This event started with the bodybuilding show, and it's always been the main event. It's kind of, although all the added events make it exciting because just the sheer volume of people makes it exciting. The idea that the focus is right back only exclusively on bodybuilding, and it's quiet and people getting ready for the big show makes it extra exciting for a bodybuilding fan.
So many storylines heading into this 2021 Arnold Classic. Your guy, Sergio Oliva Jr. on Heavy Muscle Radio about a couple of months ago said he wanted the big names in this show. He wanted this to be a blockbuster event, and that's exactly what we have here this weekend.
Well, it's the lineup is phenomenal. It's a lot of, quote, younger guys, not established pros. I mean, you don't have the Dexters that are in it where we'd be talking, okay, Dexter. You don't have, like last year, the Rammies in it, but you have a lot of really impressive guys who are looking to take the next step into, in their career and establishing themselves as, a threat to that top 3, 4, 5 placing at the Olympia.
Well, before we talk about the guys who are going to be here, let's talk about one of the headliners who's not going to be here and the man who won the last 2 of the last 3 Arnold Classics, and that's William Bonac. William Bonac unable to travel at the 11th hour, travel restrictions, seemingly the story of 2020 and 2021.
I wouldn't want to be his travel agent right now. It's terrible. It's good news for guys who, would probably end up losing to him. I mean, this is a guy who has never come into an IFBB bodybuilding show less than tremendous condition, packs an enormous amount of muscle on his frame, has beaten all the top names at some point or another. For him to have to not be able to get on a plane to come to the show has to be the biggest gut punch that you could ever imagine in your bodybuilding career. It's sad, it's terrible. It's the crazy times we're living in with COVID. But having William Bonac, who I think you had to be crazy not to think that he's the odds-on favorite to win, having won 2 of the last 3 years, having him removed from the show due to these consequences or this scenario just opens it up for anyone else, because the dynamics of the show was going to be, can anyone really outmuscle him? The answer would probably be no. So that not having him in there, being center in the prejudging, it opens it up for, okay, who's got the least amount of flaws? I think that's what a lot of this show comes down to, is who has the least amount of flaws for their physique and how do they compare each other. And that's going to determine, outside of William Bonac not being here, who will win.
Well, obviously now the door is open. There will be, in fact, a new champion here at the Arnold Classic. And you had to look at some of the top names. You had to look at Akeem Williams, fresh off his top 6 placing at last year's Olympia. Ian Valliere, top 7 placing. Steve Kuklo, who, in a sense, this is his last opportunity to clinch a ticket to the Olympia in 2 weeks. Sergio Oliva Jr., obviously, last year with his sensational posing performance and the added muscle. And then Nick Walker, someone who's looking to make an immediate bang in his Arnold Classic debut. Let's talk about Akeem Williams, who you have to look at as someone who has really broken through over the course of the last year.
Well, he broke through last year in that he was 6th in the Olympia, so that's a big breakthrough. And he's been breaking through for the last 2 or 3 years. I think he was 6th or 7th here last year, 6th maybe. I think, with Bonac out, who's freaky,
Yeah.
Akeem steps up in terms of the replacement freaky guy. I mean, he's, every one of these guys has their own flaws, but in terms of freakiness, Akeem has that type of physique. He's broad up top, he's got crazy legs, crazy delts and arms. He's the most muscular, I think, of the bunch.
And you look at Someone like an Ian Valier, who Dave Palumbo very high on in terms of the size that he brings on stage. Very reminiscent of a Steve Kukla as well. In that not many on that stage, on any given stage, are going to outmuscle him. A lot of momentum heading into the show. Wins at the Tampa Pro and at the Texas Pro, and really looking to make his mark, trying to get into that upper echelon.
Yeah, he's just taken this year his physique to another level of refinement. And he has height and he has width. So those are, when you have refinement, you have height, and you have width. Those are three things that when you watch a bodybuilding show in person, they stick out, which doesn't usually show up in pictures and videos. And he might be someone who would have, with Bonac being a shorter stature, shorter guy, would have drawn some contrasts. So without Bonac being in there, your eyes may go right to, somebody who's like him, wide, good, very good condition, refinement. It's got a lot of, as you said, a lot of momentum. It's a big show. It's a big show for everyone, but
right.
With someone coming in with two wins in tough shows, there has to be, if you're a judge, you're looking for the guy who just came off winning 2 shows. It's just natural.
And then, of course, maybe the biggest show, maybe for one competitor, this is the biggest show of them all, and that is Steve Kukla, looking for that Olympia qualification, came in second at that aforementioned Texas Pro. And look, he made no secret about what it mean to him, and really what it would mean to the Olympia lineup, given the amount of fans that he brings to any show that he's at.
Yeah, Steve's another guy who continues to improve. And he's wide, he's
yes.
thick. He compares extremely well. That was apples and oranges, so to speak. I think a lot of people could have seen Steve win. That doesn't, take anything away from Ian's deserved win, but they were very close. He'll get another matchup against Ian here. He's a veteran. He's been at this show a lot. He's not new. He's not the new kid on the block. Even though he looks young, he's been around for a long period of time. I'm sure he's, made every effort to do what he thinks he needs to do to improve from last show to this show. And I don't know really what that is. If that's, coming in a little bit better condition, coming a little bit fuller. When you're a big guy, sometimes condition is really just where someone says, we've seen you a little tighter. It's, well, what they're really saying and don't know it is we've seen you fuller.
Right.
So I expect him to be at his best, on a big show like this, to step it up. And, he'll be definitely in the mix to win the show. I think there's a lot of people in the mix to win the show.
And one of those guys is Sergio Oliva Jr., last year's best poser. Added level of muscle density, as we have seen from some of his progress pictures. What can you tell us as his coach as far as what we can expect from Sergio?
I just think there's more of him this year. I thought his condition was outstanding last year. I think his condition will be outstanding this year. There's just more to him. If you put him on a scale, there's probably more weight. I don't know what he weighs, but, it's probably there. It reflects on the fact that the scale's heavier. But he's got more, like a lot of these guys who just keeping at it. He's added more size, more density, and he's very tall and very wide. A lot of people don't realize how tall he is, and he's got a lot of width. And the width might not show up when you're, winning the Nationals at a lower weight, or winning the New York Pro, or these other shows that he's won at a lower weight. Sometimes when you fill it out, then you see, the width. So I think having filled out his frame a lot will make a big impact on just nothing more than standing relaxed in the lineup. There's just more to him, more V-taper, because there's more delts, pecs, back, legs. He's going to be very dangerous.
Let's get a final note on the open class, and that is the debut of Nick Walker for the Arnold Classic, at least. Really much ballyhooed ever since breaking into the pro ranks. Very transparent in terms of the progress pictures. You're seeing the freakiness that he brings, that he's posting seemingly every other day. A lot of excitement surrounding the Arnold Classic debut of Nick Walker.
Yeah, he's got momentum like Ian, and he's got a fan base, and he's got a lot of thickness and density. There's nothing to knock against Nick Walker other than, this lineup is not the lineup in which he won in. So at this level, it's a game of contrasts and seeing what how you end up looking like next to the guy you're standing next to. And this is a deep lineup. So I think the expectations are really high. And I'm sure he'll look fantastic, but I just think that you know, you're discounting the freakiness of Akeem. You're discounting Kuklow's size, who's also, he's as thick as Nick Walker.
Yeah.
You're discounting, the people we've spoken about their attributes. So it's, at the end of the day, prejudgings to measure these guys up. And I think that Nick, like all these guys, will compare really well. But we are going to see after prejudging who really is the best, one or two guys, and you can't decide until you see them next to each other. It's just like if you had broken down, how's Kuklo going to do against Valier against Kuklo, you'd probably be pretty certain on the way it would go. But once you see him, you say, oh, wow, it's different than what I expected.
Right.
So that's how these big shows go. And, I don't care what anyone says. Not everyone, but a lot of people, nerves play a huge role. So sometimes people's, what we expect and what we see is two different things, just because the enormous amount of pressure on all these guys we just mentioned.
One of the deepest, one of the most talented Arnold Classic lineups in recent history, if not ever. Just got a quick note from you on the Classic Physique division. We're going to have a rematch of last year's showdown between Terrence Ruffin and the eventual champion Alex Cambronero. But another big name to look out for, and I mean big, is Brian Jones. Finished last year 5th at the Classic Physique Olympia, and you've seen some of the size improvements that he's made. Some people calling for him to go to the Open, some people calling for him as far as maybe Chris Bumstead's biggest challenger, but then you got a guy in this lineup too who we're going to see for the first time on U.S. soil in Peter Molnar.
Yeah, Peter Molnar looks great. He's like in tremendous condition. He doesn't have the size that Brian Jones has. But this is the Classic division, and sometimes, what shows up on stage has to do with a lot of tie-ins. I think of Terrence Ruffin. I think if you saw Terrence Ruffin in the gym, you'd say he'd get destroyed. Really, just like training with a tank top on or training without a shirt. With someone like Terrence Ruffin, who's tied together the right way, has the right insertions, and a great level of conditioning. I mean, he knocks off a lot of big people. He stood toe-to-toe, really, for the title last year in terms, people would say his stature is not as good as Chris's, and he might not be quite as big, but you can't, overlook all his strengths and attributes. So, there's a huge contrast. We're talking about contrasts, in the Open between Brian Jones and Terrence Ruffin. It's going to be interesting to see how they match up. But Brian Jones, yeah, he's phenomenal. And I thought and I think like a lot of people at the Olympia last year, he could have easily placed one or two spots higher and nobody would have, blinked an eye.
A lot of reasons for excitement this upcoming weekend. Stay with us all weekend long. We're going to be bringing some individual interviews as well with some of the top athletes from the Arnold Classic field. For Chris Aceto, I'm Siddique Farooqi. Keep it locked to rxmuscle.com.